I never imagined that answering a simple job ad would lead me into the strangest chapter of my life. It all started when I came across a small, almost hidden listing in the local newspaper. Night cleaner wanted, Elmwood Museum, midnight shift, good pay, discretion required. I needed the money. My previous job at a diner had ended abruptly when the place shut down. The museum's offer seemed easy enough. Cleaning, at night, I could handle that. When I arrived for the interview, the museum looked like something out of a Gothic novel. Towering spires, iron gates, and stone gargoyles perched like watchful sentinels. Despite its grandeur, the place felt forgotten. The curator, Mr. Alcott, greeted me at the door. He was tall and gaunt with sharp cheekbones and unsettlingly bright eyes. "You'll work alone," he said, ushering me inside. "Most of the exhibits are delicate. Stay respectful, stay quiet." The museum smelled of aged paper and polished wood. As Mr. Alcott led me through the halls, the exhibits seemed to stare back. Ancient masks, crumbling scrolls, faded portraits. Finally, we reached a small office near the back. On the desk was a laminated sheet titled, "7 Rules for Night Cleaners." 1. Begin exactly at midnight. Not before, not after. 2. Never enter the east wing after 2 a.m. 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. 4. Polish the Egyptian sarcophagus, but never open it. 5. If the security lights flicker 3 times, leave the room immediately. 6. Ignore any voices calling your name. 7. By sunrise, you must exit through the west door only. These are not mere guidelines, Mr. Alcott warned. They are essential for your safety. I tried to laugh it off. Sounds like you had some pranksters around. He didn't smile. You'll understand soon enough. That night, as the old grandfather clock in the main hall struck 12, I grabbed my mop and started my first shift. The museum felt different at night. The shadows were thicker, the air heavier. Objects seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I remembered the first rule. Midnight. I had started on time. So far, so good. But as I moved through the dimly lit halls, my footsteps echoing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching. And then, somewhere in the east wing, I heard a soft creak. A footstep. I froze. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. I stood still. Every instinct screamed at me to look behind. The footstep echoed again, soft, deliberate. But I clenched my jaw and remembered Rule 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. I gripped the mop tighter. It's just the old floorboards, I told myself. Buildings this old always creak. Still, the footsteps didn't fade. They matched my every pause and movement, as if an unseen shadow mirrored me. I forced myself to continue. The ancient civilizations room was first on my list. Its centerpiece was the Egyptian sarcophagus Mr. Alcott had mentioned. The golden coffin gleamed under the dim emergency lights. The face carved into its lid seemed almost alive. Rule 4. Polish the Egyptian sarcophagus, but never open it. I knelt beside it, pulling out a soft cloth and special cleaner. My hand trembled slightly as I wiped the dust from the ornate surface. Hieroglyphics whispered stories of forgotten kings and eternal curses. You'll understand soon enough. Mr. Alcott's words haunted me. As I worked, the temperature dropped. My breath fogged in the air. Shadows in the corners seemed to stretch longer, darker. Then came the sound again. Creak, creak, closer this time. I ignored it and kept polishing. Suddenly, the security lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. Rule 5. If the security lights flicker 3 times, leave the room immediately. I dropped the cloth. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Without hesitation, I backed away from the sarcophagus and slipped through the nearest door, entering the hall of portraits. The air here was warmer, but the unease clung to me like cobwebs. Dozens of old paintings lined the walls, men and women dressed in fashions centuries old. Their painted eyes followed me no matter where I moved. Just as I gathered my breath, a new sound pierced the silence. Ethan. My name. Whispered in a voice I didn't recognize. Ethan. It came from deep within the shadows, soft as silk. Rule 6. Ignore any voices calling your name. I gritted my teeth. Stay focused. Just clean. Stick to the rules. But even as I moved on, the voice grew bolder. Ethan, please. I didn't respond. I didn't even flinch. Yet from the corner of my eye, I swore one of the portraits had shifted. Its mouth now slightly open, as if trying to speak. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 2:03 a.m., Rule 2, never enter the East Wing after 2 a.m. I glanced toward the East Wing doors. They were ajar. A cold draft wafted through them. Someone or something was inviting me in. But I remembered. Stay out, obey the rules. What I didn't know was that the East Wing's secrets had already noticed me. I backed away from the East Wing doors and turned my attention to the Hall of Portraits. The voice had stopped, but the weight of unseen eyes remained heavy. One painting in particular caught my attention. A tall man dressed in black Victorian attire, silver cufflinks gleaming, eyes sharp as daggers. Unlike the others, his expression wasn't frozen in time. It had changed. The eyes were now slightly narrowed, and I could have sworn the mouth had twitched upward into a faint smirk. Impossible, I whispered. It's just my imagination. I forced myself to continue cleaning, dusting the old oak benches, polishing the brass fixtures. Anything to avoid looking back at that painting. At exactly 2:30 a.m., the grandfather clock chimed twice from the main hall. The echoes stretched through the empty corridors like a slow heartbeat. The lights flickered again, but only once this time. I stayed put, breathing slowly. That didn't count as 3 flickers. No reason to leave. Yet the air grew colder. A low hum vibrated through the floor beneath my feet, almost like chanting in a foreign tongue. I paused, mop in hand, and glanced back at the Victorian man's portrait. He blinked. Not slowly, not subtly. It was deliberate, unmistakable. One sharp, calculated blink. Rule 6 raced through my mind. Ignore any voices calling your name. But there was no rule about portraits moving. Stay calm, I told myself. Stick to the rules. Don't break the rules. But the human mind can only ignore so much. The air shifted. The East Wing doors creaked wider on their hinges as though something unseen had gently pushed them. Ethan. The voice returned, this time louder, bolder. A woman's voice, low, desperate, almost pleading. They won't tell you the truth. The rules, they're lies. I squeezed my eyes shut and recited the rules in my head like a mantra. Midnight start. No East Wing. Don't turn around. Polish, never open. Leave on flickers. Ignore voices west door at dawn. But doubt had cracked open something inside me. Were the rules protecting me or trapping me? As I moved toward the next room, something brushed against my ankle. Cold, thin, like fingers. I refused to look down. I walked faster. In the distance, just past the shadows of the exhibit halls, I heard the faint chiming of a small bell. It wasn't part of the museum. And it wasn't the last time I'd hear it. The bell's sound was faint, but it cut through the silence like a knife, a crisp, metallic ding, ding, ding. There was no bell in the museum. Not that I had ever seen. My skin prickled as I moved toward the central hall, gripping the mop handle like a weapon. My breath came out in short, frosty puffs. The light over the hall of ancient artifacts flickered weakly but held steady. No 3 flickers. Yet. I passed the Egyptian sarcophagus again. The gold face now seemed less serene, the carved eyes almost mournful. Stay on task, I told myself. Polish, dust, follow the routine. I dusted the Greco-Roman statues and wiped down the glass cases of medieval relics. All the while, the bell chimed at irregular intervals, sometimes close, sometimes distant. I paused at the Norse exhibit. A rune stone stood at its center, carved with the symbols I couldn't read. Beneath it was a plaque. The Stone of Skuld. It remembers what should be forgotten. The bell sounded again, this time right behind me. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. But the rules said nothing about bells. I tightened my grip on the mop and spun around. The hallway was empty. Only shadows stretched across the marble floor, shifting in the soft light. Then I noticed something new. At the base of the runestone lay a small, ancient-looking silver bell, tarnished with age but unmistakably the source of the sound. I bent down carefully. The bell wasn't there earlier, I was sure of it. A tiny parchment was tied to its handle with red string. The handwriting was delicate, in black ink. The 7th rule was added last. My pulse quickened. What did that mean? Was the 7th rule not part of the original set? As I reached out to touch the bell, a sharp, cold wind blew through the hall, extinguishing several lights at once. 3 flickers. Panic surged through me. I snatched my cleaning cart and rushed out of the room, the bell still ringing faintly behind me. Back in the main corridor, I checked my phone. 3:15 a.m. hours until sunrise. My gaze shifted toward the west door, the only permitted exit at dawn. But something was waiting near it. A figure, cloaked in shadows, stood motionless beneath the towering stained glass window. It wasn't Mr. Alcott. It wasn't security. And it wasn't human. The figure didn't move. It stood with its head slightly tilted, as though studying me. For a moment, I thought it might be a statue, one of the museum's many strange relics, misplaced. But no statue casts a breathing shadow. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the west door was the only way out. I couldn't afford to make it an enemy. Not yet. Ignore it, I told myself. Just follow the rules. I turned my back on the figure and wheeled my cleaning cart toward the Hall of Astronomy. The farther I moved, the colder the air grew until every breath felt like inhaling ice. The bell no longer chimed. Instead, the ticking of the old grandfather clock filled the silence. Tick, tick, tick. It sounded louder than before. Inside the Hall of Astronomy, a giant brass orrery. The mechanical model of planets stood at the center. It wasn't scheduled for cleaning tonight, but something about it drew me in. The planets, once still, now rotated slowly on their own. That wasn't possible. And then I noticed the new addition. A tiny silver bell hung from Saturn's ring, swaying gently though the air was dead still. Tied to the bell was another note. The first cleaner broke the 4th rule. My blood ran cold. Polished the sarcophagus, but never opened it. So someone had opened it. Someone before me. What happened to them? I whispered aloud. The shadows shifted. For the first time, I felt the museum itself was listening. I turned to leave, but as I did, the Victorian man from the portrait stood in the doorway, blocking my path. His black suit was perfectly pressed. His silver cufflinks gleamed. His face, the same face from the painting, was expressionless. "Ethan," he said calmly, "you're not supposed to know. Leave the bells where they are." My throat tightened. "Who are you?" He took a step forward. A warning. Behind him, the grandfather clock struck 4. The 7th rule was added last. And suddenly I realized the bells weren't trying to lure me. They were trying to warn me. The Victorian man's eyes locked with mine. He raised one gloved finger to his lips. "Stay silent. They're listening." Before I could speak, he stepped back into the shadows and vanished. My legs felt like stone. My mind raced. Who was he? How did he leave without a sound? I forced myself to focus. Stay calm. Stick to the rules. But each new discovery made the rules feel less like safeguards and more like a carefully constructed cage. As I wheeled my cart toward the West Hall, I noticed something strange. The security cameras were off. Their little red lights, usually blinking, were dead. No one was watching. Or maybe they didn't want anyone watching tonight. I passed the Hall of Folklore and paused. The next room to clean. It housed artifacts from local legends, protective charms, cursed mirrors, and old handwritten grimoires. At the center stood a massive, ancient mirror framed in dark, twisted wood. A plaque read, "The obsidian-looking glass. Don't meet your reflection after midnight." My heart sank. That warning wasn't one of the 7 rules. It was an extra, like the bells, like the Victorian man's warning. As I dusted the display cases, the mirror remained covered in a black velvet cloth, but the cloth shifted slightly as if breathing. Ignore it. Ignore it. I moved to the next display, but a small silver bell sat on the floor in front of it. Another parchment was tied to the handle. The 6th cleaner never reached the west door. My hands trembled. I thought back to Rule 7. By sunrise, you must exit through the west door only. So someone had failed to reach it before dawn. Someone who came before me. A cold gust blew out the nearest light. My reflection flickered in the glass of a nearby case, and for a split second, the reflection smiled, though I hadn't. "Ethan." The voice was back, softer, sadder, not trying to scare me, trying to help. "Find the real 7th rule, the one they hid." Behind me, the grandfather clock chimed again. 4:30 a.m. The night was slipping away. And I was beginning to suspect that Mr. Alcott's 7 rules weren't the whole truth. The museum had become a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Every exhibit whispered things I wasn't supposed to hear. Find the real 7th rule. That voice, the same gentle one, echoed in my thoughts. I moved quickly through the Hall of Folklore, keeping my eyes down. Reflections, bells, voices, all seemed like threads pulling me toward some deeper truth. I returned to the central hall. The cloaked figure near the west door was gone. In its place lay something small and metallic, another silver bell. I approached carefully. The note tied to it read, "There were never just 7. My pulse quickened. Then how many? Footsteps sounded overhead. Not the soft creaks from before, but heavy, deliberate pacing in the upper gallery. I glanced upward. The viewing balcony was shrouded in darkness, but I could sense someone or something moving. The Victorian man? Mr. Alcott? Or another former cleaner who hadn't made it out? I didn't wait to find out. Instead, I followed the bells. There was a pattern now. They always pointed toward forgotten corners of the museum, places the cleaning schedule never listed. Behind the Hall of Natural History, past a door marked Staff Only, I found a narrow staircase spiraling downward. A basement. Uncharted territory. At the bottom, a rusted metal door stood ajar. On it, someone had scratched a message in desperate, uneven letters. "Do not trust the curator." My breath caught. "Mr. Alcott." Beyond the door was a small room. Dust-covered crates lined the walls. In the center stood a pedestal, and upon it, a thick, leather-bound ledger. By the flickering flashlight on my phone, I read the title. Night Cleaner's Logbook. Dozens of names were listed, each with a start date and an end date. Elliot Price, 1998, Lauren Chu, 2003. Victor Hensley, 2009. Nathan Ford, 2015. Sasha Kim, 2021. The last name read Ethan Ward, 2025. Active. My name. But beneath Sasha Kim's entry, someone had scrawled in ink darker than the rest. She found the 8th rule. A chill ran down my spine. There were 8 rules. 7 were just the surface. I looked up and found the Victorian man standing silently in the doorway. "Don't let him write your end date, Ethan," he whispered. "Once it's written, you belong here." The grandfather clock above chimed 5 times. 1 hour to dawn, and 1 hour to uncover the final rule before it was too late. The Victorian man vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving me alone in the basement room. The ledger still sat open. My name stared back at me like a gravestone waiting to be engraved. She found the 8th rule. Sasha Kim, the last cleaner before me. I flipped through the final pages of the logbook. Most were empty, but near the back, a folded note had been wedged between the pages. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. "If you found this, you've broken at least 1 rule already." "Good. The rules are lies. Alcott doesn't protect cleaners. He traps them. He feeds them to the museum." Beneath the writing was a rough sketch, a floor plan. The east wing, the forbidden area. Sasha had marked a path in red ink leading to a room labeled Vault 17. At the bottom, she had written, "The 8th rule is in Vault 17. It's the only way to end this." A cold draft snaked through the basement. I turned toward the stairs. I knew what I had to do. Break Rule 2. Never enter the east wing after 2 a.m. It was now 5:05 a.m., the last hour of my shift. I could either obey and survive another night, or disobey and uncover the truth once and for all. I chose the latter. Climbing back upstairs, I crossed the silent halls towards the east wing. The doors stood wide open now, almost inviting. The air beyond them was cold and dry, tinged with a strange, metallic scent. As I stepped through, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged instantly. Dust coated the marble floor. No footprints but mine. The east wing hadn't been cleaned in years, perhaps not since Sasha's final shift. Following the path from the note, I passed beneath crumbling arches and faded murals. The exhibits here were different: sealed crates, covered displays, artifacts deemed too dangerous or mysterious for public viewing. At the far end, Vault 17 waited. Its heavy steel door bore fresh scratches. Someone or something had tried to claw their way in. I reached for the handle. The metal was ice cold. "Ethan." The voice came from behind, the gentle one. The same voice that had whispered my name since the first night. It's not too late to leave. But it was. I opened the vault. Inside, beneath a single hanging bulb, sat an ancient stone tablet resting on a velvet-draped pedestal. Strange symbols covered its surface, but at the center, in English, 7 rules had been carefully inscribed. 7 rules I already knew. But beneath them, newly carved, was a final line. The 8th rule: if you read this, you must stay. The door slammed shut behind me. and the Victorian man's voice whispered from the shadows. Now you understand. The vault door sealed with a deafening clang. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. If you read this, you must stay. The 8th rule wasn't a warning, it was a sentence. The symbols on the stone tablet shimmered faintly, as though reacting to my breath, my presence. I tried the door handle. It didn't budge. Stay calm, Ethan. Think. I turned back to the tablet, searching for answers beyond the curse written into it. Etched at the tablet's base were initials, S.K. Sasha Kim. She had been here. She had seen the 8th rule, but she had left me a final clue. Just beneath her initials, barely visible in the dust, was a single word scratched into the stone. Break. Break the rule. Break the tablet. Break the curse. I scanned the room. In the corner rested an old iron rod, likely used to prop open crates. I grabbed it and hesitated only a second before swinging it at the stone tablet. The impact echoed like thunder through the vault. Cracks splintered across the surface. From the hallway beyond the sealed door, voices rose, many voices, men, women, whispers, cries, as though 100 trapped souls had awakened. Break the rule. I struck the tablet again. This time it shattered. A rush of cold air blasted through the vault. The 7 rules on the tablet dissolved into dust, vanishing from existence. For a moment I stood frozen, expecting punishment. Instead, the vault door creaked open on its own. Beyond it stood the Victorian man, but he was different now. His face was warmer, his eyes no longer sharp and cold. "You've done what we could not," he said softly. "You've freed us." Behind him, shadows peeled away from the walls, taking the shapes of other figures, men and women dressed in custodial uniforms from decades past. The former night cleaners. Alcott bound us here. We became part of the museum, until now. "What happens to me?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. The man smiled faintly. "You still have a choice. The west door." It stood open at the far end of the corridor. Beyond it, the horizon was silver with the first light of dawn. "But if I leave, the cycle ends," the man said. "For everyone." I hesitated. The weight of 100 lost souls pressed upon me. "Go, Ethan," the voices urged. "You've earned it." My feet moved before my mind could decide. I walked past the man, past the fading shadows of the cleaners, and toward the light. As I stepped through the west door, the museum groaned behind me, a long, low sigh, like a beast exhaling its final breath. The sun touched my face. I had broken the 8th rule, and I was free. The morning light felt unreal, warm, clean, untouched by the weight of shadows and rules. I stood outside the Elmwood Museum, watching as the old building seemed to shrink in the daylight. Its spires no longer looked imposing. The gargoyles appeared worn and tired. The west door, the same door I had exited, slowly swung closed behind me with a final hollow click. I half expected Mr. Alcott to appear, furious that I had defied the rules. But the museum remained silent. The curator was nowhere to be seen. A police siren wailed faintly in the distance. Birds sang. For the first time in weeks, normal sounds returned to my world. I glanced down at my phone. 6:04 a.m. shift over. But was the job over? I turned to leave when something heavy tugged at my thoughts. The logbook. The ledger in the basement. My name was still in it. "If you read this, you must stay." But I had broken the tablet. The curse should have lifted. And yet, I retraced my steps. Not into the museum, but around it, to the back entrance where the staff deliveries were made. The door was unlocked. strange. Inside, the museum was completely still. The morning sun streamed through stained glass windows, coloring the marble floors in shades of red and blue. I hurried to the basement, heart pounding. The room with the ledger was just as I had left it. Dust motes floated in the air. The cracked vault door stood open. The logbook rested on its pedestal. I flipped to the last page. Ethan Ward, 2025. Active. I grabbed a pen from the desk and struck through my name. Not anymore. But as the ink crossed my name, new writing etched itself into the paper, forming words not written by my hand. The cycle is broken. No further names will be added. Beneath it, a final message appeared in Sasha Kim's handwriting. Thank you. The grandfather clock chimed once, soft and distant. Then the ledger's pages began to turn on their own, faster and faster until they became a blur. When the motion stopped, the logbook was blank. Every name had vanished. The voices, the footsteps, the bells, they were gone. The museum was just a building again. I set the logbook down and walked up the stairs into the sunlight. I was free, truly free. Or so I thought. For the first time since my first night shift, I felt light, free from the crushing dread that had haunted every midnight. I left the museum without looking back. But freedom is a fragile thing. 3 days later, curiosity gnawed at me. I needed to know if the museum had truly changed, or if the darkness merely waited for another fool to walk through its doors. I returned during daylight hours, as a visitor this time. The exterior looked the same. Weathered stone, silent gargoyles. But the west door, the door that had once meant life or death, was sealed shut, permanently. Inside, the exhibits bustled with tourists and school groups. Laughter, conversations, normal sounds. No signs of Mr. Alcott. In fact, when I asked the front desk about him, the receptionist frowned. Mr. Alcott? I'm sorry, but there's no one here by that name. But he's the curator, I insisted. She shook her head. The last curator retired 10 years ago. Since then, it's been managed by a board. No individual curators anymore. Cold dread curled in my stomach. Mr. Alcott was never officially here. I wandered the halls, the Egyptian sarcophagus, the portraits, the rune stone, all unchanged. But none of them made my pulse spike. Not like the new exhibit at the far end of the main hall, a temporary installation. Whispers of the forgotten, artifacts from unknown origins. I entered cautiously. The room was dimly lit, the displays curated to feel eerie but educational. At the center was a glass case. Inside it rested an object I recognized instantly. A silver bell, tarnished, ancient, tied with a thin red string. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Recovered from the East Wing Vault, exact origin unknown." And beneath that, in tiny script, "Donated anonymously." My mouth went dry. I hadn't donated, and I doubted any of the freed cleaners had. As I stared at the bell, I noticed a faint inscription on the case's inner frame, almost invisible to the casual observer. "Eighth rule broken, cycle pause, not ended, paused." Not ended. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The bell inside the case trembled slightly, though no one had touched it. The museum's curse wasn't destroyed. It was waiting. I backed away from the glass case, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't tear my eyes from the silver bell. It swayed gently on its own. No drafts, no movement in the room. Only one explanation. Something was still here. I scanned the exhibit for hidden speakers or trick wires. Maybe the museum had turned the supernatural into entertainment. But the closer I looked, the clearer it became. This was no show. The Victorian man's warning returned to me. Don't let him write your end date. I thought I had escaped the logbook's curse. But the final message had only said the cycle was paused, not broken. Paused implies it can resume. Suddenly, I noticed a new laminated sheet posted near the exhibit entrance. At first glance, it looked like a typical museum guideline for visitors. But as I read, my blood froze. Visitor protocol for Whispers of the Forgotten exhibit. 1. Enter only during daylight hours. 2. Do not touch the displays. 3. If you hear a bell, notify museum staff immediately. 4. Ignore any voices calling your name. 5. If the bell rings 3 times, leave the exhibit at once. 6. Do not investigate the East Wing. 7. Exit through the main doors before closing time. 7 rules. New ones. For visitors. The museum had rewritten the curse, adjusting it to fit the public. No more night cleaners. Now anyone could become the next victim. The bell trembled again, louder this time. Ethan. A soft, desperate whisper. Not threatening. Warning. It's starting again. I turned on my heel and left the exhibit, forcing myself to walk calmly through the crowded museum. No one else seemed to notice the bell's movements or hear the voices. Outside, I paused at the steps. The sky was clear. Birds chirped. Life went on. But deep in my bones, I knew the truth. The curse hadn't died. It had evolved. And though I had broken the 8th rule once, I couldn't save everyone. Not unless I exposed the museum's secrets, not unless I warned others. Which is why I'm writing this now. If you ever visit the Elmwood Museum, don't enter the Whispers of the Forgotten exhibit. If you hear a bell ring 3 times, leave. Don't look back. Some rules are meant to protect you, and some are meant to trap you forever.